You're listening to ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. This episode of ProdCast is brought to you by MSCRMaddons.com. With focus on productivity and usability, MSCRMaddons.com is a leading provider of high-quality add-on solutions for Dynamics 365. Whether it's the need for professional documents generated and processed on a single click, keeping your storage costs under control by moving documents to SharePoint or Azure Blob, or simplifying your users' daily tasks by improved navigation and activity handling, MSCRMaddons.com add-ons will help you drive efficiency and user experience. We thank MSCRMaddons.com for sponsoring ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. Welcome to the first ProdCast for 2019. Happy New Year, Matthew.
Happy New Year. Good to be here. How you feeling, Joel?
The year has been great so far, all 3 days of it. So a question we get sometimes is, how do you come up with ideas for content, be it podcasts or blogs or presentations? We talked about speaking at conferences and a lot of different things, but I don't think we've really covered how do you come up with those ideas. So Matthew, what are some things you do to come up with some ideas for things you present or things you podcast or write about?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of places where I do this. The most low-hanging fruit for that one is, what questions am I answering for like customers where we're having conversations? Is there like a unique situation I had to put together an email or a presentation or a response on some topic that came up, or even a set of those kind of questions that I answer all the time? That's a fantastic one that I love for finding content.
Yeah, I'm similar to that. The best source of content is your day-to-day life experiences. If you are writing about Dynamics or software, if you use the software or work with people who do, and you come up with questions, get questions you're asked in emails, those sort of things. I wrote a post on LinkedIn yesterday, which was about getting started from work after being out for the holidays. And I was really kind of talking to myself in there and kind of going by my experience of this is what I do to psych myself up to get going. And so that's where I find if people give me a request like, hey, could you write a post about something, and it's not something that I normally do, it's kind of forced and it's not as good. It's the best stuff comes from things that I come across in my day-to-day life, and a lot of it is just looking for things. I mean, before I really was blogging or doing podcasts, I wouldn't have any ideas. But then once you start and you put those glasses on and can see, hey, this would be a great topic because I'm sure if I'm having this problem, other people are having this problem. Yeah. Or if I learned this skill and this is what helped me, there's somebody else who is learning this skill and this could help them too.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially for all those aspiring content creators out there, turning over that new leaf in the new year here, one of the biggest fears that I hear and talk with people about is everyone's afraid that they're like one idea away from running out of content ideas. and really that day-to-day is a great source for it if you look through that lens of, oh, that's a blog post. Oh, that's a podcast. That's in fact 2 or 3 different podcasts.
Right.
Kind of breaking that down into logical chunks that people might do. But I will say, one of the other areas that's good for this, and I know we've talked about this as a learning tool before, but sometimes if there's an area that I want to investigate or learn more about or educate myself on, putting that out there as a topic that I want to cover in a podcast almost sets that deadline for me where I now have a time frame in which I have to go and learn about this and figure it out so I can kind of meet that self-imposed deadline or now group deadline if I'm recording with somebody else or doing it's for a podcast. That's true, less so on an individual blog.
Right. And so you have to build up kind of a tolerance for discomfort to do that. I mean, I think normal people aren't comfortable with that pressure, or they want to avoid the pressure of the deadline, but I've learned how to use that pressure of the deadline. So I've got a webinar on the 15th for something that I'm still not quite up to where I want to be, but it's motivating me to do what I need to do by then. And I think a lot of times we compartmentalize our lives, and we think in the phase of this project, this is my work, this is my life outside of work, I'm wearing this hat. But if you can break down those compartments and draw lines between things, that can open up a lot of new possibilities. Such as if you have a hobby, say you really like gardening, and you are working with technology, make a connection between the two. Don't limit yourself just to one specific area.
Yeah, no, that's great. One other comment that I'll make around that is that sometimes the fact that you are learning it for the first time gives you almost this insight that other people who are more versed in it don't have. So if you're going to be talking about learning something that you've recently learned on a podcast, those or even writing about it in a blog, those things that you just went through are very fresh in your mind. You know where the stumbling points were, and much like if you've ever heard the saying, like if somebody asks, does anybody have any questions, and you're thinking of a question, you should ask it because there are probably other people in the room that have the same question. That same thing is true as you go through learning a new topic or learning a new concept. So if you stumbled somewhere trying to learn it, someone else is probably going to stumble there too, and you can help them kind of get past that hoop so they don't have to go through the same kind of struggle that you did, even if it's a small struggle along the way there.
Right. And I don't know who's responsible for it, but remember the stages of competence, the unconscious incompetence, the conscious incompetence. Basically, when you don't know something, you don't know what you don't know. But then once you get, say, 2 or 3 levels of it, you become more aware of what you don't know. And that's where I think a lot of people struggle in that area. They think, I don't know enough about this topic to lead a session or write a blog post or talk on a podcast about it. But the reality is you've learned a lot to get to that point, and there's a lot of people who are further behind you in that stage. I'll use an example from the Dynamics and Microsoft Business Applications world, which is right now the Power Platform is still fairly new. And there's a lot of people in our industry, a lot of senior consultants, architects, etc., pre-sales people who feel like their whole world has changed and they don't know anything about it. But you got to realize everybody else, metaphorically speaking, is at the same point as you.
Right.
So it's not like there's people that have 10 years of Power Apps experience, because it hasn't been around for 10 years. It's just been around for a couple of years. So this is a great opportunity to join that conversation. And as you learn it, share what you learn. And sure, somebody might ask a question that stumps you, but that's, it's okay to say, I don't know that. Let me find out and get back to you. And that's another learning opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I do another podcast with Britta Rexted, Implement This, and we're kind of taking some of that same concept and really bringing it to the forefront of, we know a lot of things around this platform, but the platform has grown a heck of a lot and changed a heck of a lot. And how do you deal with those areas where it's a new frontier for everybody? So, definitely, like it's a fun one if you can get to that point of being comfortable with what you do and don't know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So then what's the next step after you come up with your topic? And this is kind of enhancing what we talked about with Marius, the CRM Viking, a couple episodes ago. So this is good.
Yeah. So, when outlining a topic, there are a few different things. I mean, it is going to literally be, for me, every time it's going to be an outline of some sort. I use, bulleted, indented outline as the mechanic or the framework that I'm going with. That top level bullet is going to be the key discussion points. But even before those key discussion points, I will put together, if there's think of it like a pre-reading list or reference materials where, if sometimes you and I do this, if there's like an article that one of us read, that it makes sense for both of us to have seen it before we sit down to be able to record, that's going to be like the first section of the outline is the pre-reading or the prep, kind of assumptions of a baseline that we're going to have. Then it's the main topic areas and any kind of key discussion points that I want to make sure that we hit. And even calling out what some of those specific questions might be, or where we want to jump off into some of our back and forth. And then the last piece is, what are the other links or sources that we want to point people to? So those specific pieces that we want to make sure to call out, either throughout one of the sections opportunistically as it comes up, or maybe at the end if we don't cover it naturally through the course of the episode. So those are kind of the categories of the outline that I like to put together and try to collaborate through. How about, like, what's your sense there? Because you've been on the other side of, like, the many notes that I put together. I don't know how much you actually use them, but
yeah. So definitely, if we're talking about a podcast or a presentation at a conference or something like that, a lot of them follow the same basic outline. I have certain structures that I use a lot. One is if you're talking about a new technology or what you need to know about technology, you cover what is it, brief background, and then go into kind of the details, but do it in a structured way to answer the question, why does this matter and why should I care about it? And then kind of summarize at the end. And that's the typical process. And a lot of this is, I do more mental outlining than actual physical outlining. I still will do an outline, but for example, I was building a deliverable, and this is actually a project deliverable, but it's very similar to how I would approach a blog post or a podcast about something. Mm-hmm. Before I wrote it, I mentally was thinking through, what do I want to express in here? What's the logical way to show it? And then broke it out into its various sections. And so then it was pretty easy to assemble those pieces. And this is one of the things where the more you do it, just like anything, any skill, if you were doing the 10,000 hours to become an expert at whatever, anything becomes easier the more you do it, because you have the equipment to do it. You have, pre-existing stuff you can use as a starting point to update. And so it just becomes a lot easier. The biggest struggle is when you get started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I feel like getting to, and this, I think, this happens naturally more with a podcast. It can be easier to get stuck on a blog post because it's really easy to get caught up in your own head and not get to a first draft that you can then kind of tweak from. I find that, as we go through a podcast progression, there's a natural, almost conversational tone that happens with it, and we kind of push through to some sort of logical conclusion. From a blog post perspective, it's easier to get stuck in, one finer point or specific concept or idea that's a small part of the overall blog post. And, by kind of starting with an outline and building out content to support that overall structure, it helps put into perspective maybe how much time or how much effort you should be putting into any of those sub-bullets that's there.
Right. I've actually got a little trick around that, which is, and I've had conversations with Sean Tabor about this, that for him, he says it's easier for him to do a podcast or presentation than a blog post. And I get that, because sometimes just writing out even a 4 to 6 paragraph blog post can take more work than getting together for a half-hour podcast. But one little trick, if you find like you're trying to express something and it's so easy when you're talking, but it's harder when you're writing, use voice dictation. I use either, the Windows voice dictation, or I actually have a copy of Dragon Naturally Speaking. So I'm doing more because it'll dictate longer. The standard device voice dictation will turn off after 30 seconds or something. So that's helpful, especially if you're trying to describe a concept and you just find you're stuck. Turn on your microphone and voice dictate it, and it won't be cleanly written, but then you'll have that, and then you can wordsmith it and get it cleaned up. And I've written entire blog post drafts as voice dictation.
I love that. And I so that's something over the course of the last year, I've been working with my dad, actually. I'd gotten him a Christmas gift a year ago now called Storyworth, which was a Christmas gift that was probably more of a task for him than anything else. But the idea is you get these story prompts each week, and the idea is that you come up with some sort of story going back through your life, write it down. You get one of those per week, so that at the end of a year you have 52 different stories based on these little writing prompts. And one of the things that he did to really power through that and be able to get out his individual stories each week, it was to have a basic outline. He'd outline it on like a whiteboard, and then from there he'd pull out Dragon Naturally Speaking, actually, and he would just speak it, and then he'd go through, edit, send it to me, I'd do an edit and that kind of thing. But it got to be a really kind of predictable cadence for him in being able to do that. So I will stand behind that one as well, even though it's something I don't do personally.
Yeah, I did something talking about your dad and the story thing. I did something somewhat similar in the last few months. I interviewed my mom, and I split it into two because she's had a lot things she's done during her life, and that was a really great experience too, and just something that captured, because as she's getting older and whatever, that's something that my children can have and listen to and hear her stories.
Yeah, no, that's
a great thing to do.
Yeah, it's very cool. I love that idea.
All right, so you've got your outline now. You got it in your head. As you're getting started, it's probably a good idea to get that down. I think that's where a lot of people stop. A lot of people get stuck there. People spend a lot more time. You think you have to do a lot of work to get started. You think you got to get all these tools, and I need a better pen to write with, or I need a better notebook, or I need a new app. You don't need any of that. You can do all this with WordPad on your computer if you want to, or a pencil and or pen and paper. But once you got the outline, then what do you do?
Well, I mean, so a couple of different things. There's the, and this for me is where it gets a little bit different for a podcast versus writing a blog post. So for me, for a podcast, I will make sure to have like OneNote as a tool where that's going to be shared. Whatever that outline is going to be shared and available for me and whatever either co-host or guest we're going to be working with there. And I'll kind of have a running list of ideas with the outlines there, and then a tab to be able to archive anything that we've either decided is a terrible idea and shouldn't actually do it, or after we record that. But from a podcasting perspective, there are lots of great tools to actually capture the audio and that type of thing. Each of which is probably a podcast episode unto its own to be able to describe them. On the blogging side of things, and I've talked about this some before on ProdCast, but I try to actually use the tool Scrivener to take my outline, and each of those top level bullets becomes its own note card within a Scrivener folder in what's basically just a blogging or content creation notebook that I have. So I'll do both book ideas, kind of downloadable content ideas, as well as blog ideas that I'll put in there. And the concept of having them as a note card is really nice, because you can start with the basic idea, but then, quote unquote, flip over that note card, or, open up that note card, and, on the digital back of it is, a full on, kind of rich text editor where I can have more bullets, or I can write out content or link to other things that I'm working on. So as I kind of see, try to make sure I have enough meat on each piece of the bone, I can see that structure get built out, and then I can also kind of mark different components as done or to do, or kind of add those labels to them.
Okay. I gotta admit, I've tried Scrivener. I haven't been able to figure it out. So what I do is I still use my to-do list, and I have a list of ideas. And similar idea, prioritize them as I have time to do them, and mark them done as I do them. I like the tool of Scrivener, and I see its power, but I just haven't figured it out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'll say one of the drawbacks of Scrivener, and I'd love to find kind of a silver bullet for this, but it's not very mobile friendly. So if I have ideas or that thing kind of comes to me, I end up using another application to capture that down and pull it into Scrivener later, and that creates extra work. It's not the most productive of those, and I know other people who use things like. They'll use something like Trello to come up with their ideas, and as they build it out more, they'll move it to different bins on a board. So, like, there are definitely other tools that are out there. I mean, even to your point, like, up until you're actually going to publish, it can be pen and paper to really bring those ideas to life. Before you make that digital.
Well, I think it also depends on if you are doing something by yourself or doing something collaboratively. Because if I'm doing something by myself, then my to-do list works fine. If you and I are planning something, it doesn't just work for me to have it on my to-do list. That's where a OneNote notebook, or if it's a presentation, sometimes a PowerPoint deck that we're sharing with slides designated per person where we're planning it out and the outline of the presentation. When you're doing more than two people, though, and I'll use the CRM Audio Podcast Network, one of the challenges we've had is just coordinating everything, scheduling things, who's doing what topics so we don't talk about the same topics. So one of the things we're moving to, and we just set this up in 2019, is actually using Trello there. And the beauty of it that I see, again, ask me in a couple months once we use it for a couple months, but when Neil Benson and you and Sean Tabor and other people are doing episodes, it gives us a pretty easy way to have you put your, like an in production scheduled or to schedule and scheduled, so that we can coordinate the details there. And you could also on those have the show notes and other things like that. So that looks to be useful. I think the answer might depend on how many people you're collaborating with.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point.
Or Microsoft Planner would be another example if you're on Office and on Teams and stuff. That might be a good way to do it too.
Yeah, definitely. So a couple of things as we've gone through this that I want to make sure that I cover off on, just because I don't want some of the things that we've said to be taken or misinterpreted or taken out of context. One of which is, for some of these things, as you and I talk about it as longtime kind of content creators, there's a certain amount of what I think is perceived as almost I don't know a confidence that may seem like we can go too far if we're not actually an expert, quote unquote expert about a topic in talking about it. And I want to bring this idea around of authenticity around that content that you're doing. So let's say for me, if there's a topic where I'm less of an expert on it, I want to use it as a learning opportunity in what I'm going to put out there. Part of doing that is being kind of not trying to cover up the fact that you are rather new to it, rather using that as part of the narrative, part of the story, part of how you approach it. If I were to then, take what I had just learned and try to suggest that I'd been doing that for, I've been using Power Apps for years, and I've done 20 implementations this way and that kind of thing. It's like, all of a sudden that's a line that, if you're using this approach, you don't want to cross that line. You have to keep that authenticity in mind. And I think that if you're looking at any of these, even though it's largely one directional, putting the content out there, you're facilitating some sort of conversation and discussion, and your authenticity needs to be part of that and something that you're keeping in mind there. So just be upfront about that kind of stuff. Don't say, the ProdCast guys told me I can blog about stuff that I don't really know, because that's not the point.
Right. You reminded me of the book Getting Naked, a business fable about shedding the 3 fears that sabotage client loyalty. I know Britt has talked about that book. Mm-hmm. But basically it talks about being authentic in sales scenarios or sales or professional services type delivery. And it talks about imposter syndrome, where people feel like I'll be revealed to be a fraud at this because I'm not really an expert. So you want to be authentic in what you say, but you don't want to go too far in either way. One is not speaking up or not contributing because you don't know everything, but also getting overconfident and misrepresenting yourself. Right. So I think there's a balance there. I think most professionals, cut themselves too short, and they under discount their expertise and their knowledge. But if some people are overly confident, your warning's dead on.
Yep. Cool. And then the last thing I said, kind of turning back around to where does the content actually come from? Don't forget, phone a friend or do a good old fashioned brainstorming session. Talk with someone who kind of knows the field or general area that you're talking about, but maybe isn't an expert themselves. Sometimes those types of conversations can unearth where those really good ideas are, or where someone could use that little bit of insight that you happen to have, where just kind of trying to think through it yourself, you wouldn't be able to do. So definitely use that phone a friend to brainstorm some of those ideas.
Yeah, and getting a peer review before you present or post your blog is always a good idea, especially if you have an honest friend who knows their stuff and can give you honest feedback. You don't necessarily have to change everything based on feedback. Some are just personality, and I'd rather use this word than this word. But if it's at least to say, am I off base here? Am I missing anything? And a lot of times you can get some good feedback. So be open to feedback.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Joel, I think that's all I've got to feed into this one.
Yeah, so this is great. So I encourage everybody, it's new year, great time to start contributing and start writing and posting blogs, podcasts, YouTube videos, all that great content. So these are great tips. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you, Joel.
This has been ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio with Matthew C. Anderson and Joel Lindstrom. Follow Matthew on Twitter at @MCAnderson or on his blog, connectingthedata.com. Follow Joel Lindstrom on Twitter at Joel Lindstrom. ProdCast and the rest of the CRM Audio Network are available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and anywhere else fine podcasts are available. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC.